From 20 June to 20 July, attention in Korea is focused on Kaesong, site of ceasefire peace negotiations. The first meeting is scheduled for 10 July. The UN negotiators establish a base camp near Munsan, commuting to each of the conferences at Kaesong. On 21 July, the Communists request a recess in the peace negotiations. It has become apparent by this time that the Reds are staging a buildup of force above the neutralized Kaesong area. However, during this period, only minor changes occur in the Korean battle line as action is confined to patrols and minor clashes. From the beginning, the Kaesong story is the story of stalemate. It began late in June when Russia's Malik suggested peace talks. And of course, the North Koreans and Chinese Red volunteers were ready to listen. Kaesong has been agreed upon as a neutral zone of conference. The first representatives, with no rank to exceed that of colonel, leave Munsan, the site of the UN peace camp, on 8 July. They have been instructed to make no commitments for the UN. They are limited to establishing an agenda for future talks and to assuring safe conduct to UN delegates during the armistice meetings. They are empowered to come to agreement on what is to be discussed, to make it clear to the Communists that the armistice talks must take up military matters only. With this program and these limitations clearly understood, the helicopter bearing the general's representatives takes off from Munsan. At Kaesong, the letter W, which marks the landing strip, is taken to mean welcome. Later, UN reporters insist it stands for the Korean word for stalling. Keep in mind that the Communists rejected General Ridgway's suggestion that the talks be held aboard a Dutch hospital ship. They requested Kaesong, within their own lines, as a neutral meeting place. Nevertheless, the UN negotiators follow their host to the courtyard with open minds. The uniformed Chinese woman turns out to be not a high official, as was first supposed, but a competent interpreter. She was the only uniformed woman they saw. The town of Kaesong gives the impression of peace and tranquility. Early pictures of the Conference on Agreement reveal nothing of the tension that prevails, of the long arguments over simple matters of procedure, nor do the UN representatives return to Munsan with much that is significant for the waiting reporters. Their attitude, their poker faces, seem to say only, wait and see. But it was later learned that during that first conference, and the one of 11 July, the Communists took pictures of UN representatives being stopped at roadblocks by armed Reds. Those pictures, widely distributed throughout Asia, suggested that vanquished UN forces were seeking peace from their victorious enemy. Totally unaware of this, Admiral Joy leaves Munsan for his first meeting with the North Koreans and representatives of the Chinese Communists, who have given up the pretext of being volunteers and do most of the talking. Admiral Joy is quite willing to have it so, knowing full well that the North Koreans are no longer in a position to make any decisions of their own. The Communist negotiators arrive with an attitude of arrogant overconfidence. Even while the first armistice talks begin, armed Reds are in evidence within the very shadow of the conference room. True, no guns are drawn, nobody gets hurt. But the propaganda value of these pictures, also taken by the Reds and distributed throughout Asia, do irreparable harm to the stature of UN forces. The same forces which had, in truth, inflicted losses on the Reds to a ratio of 100 to 1. However, the first conference ends without incident. without too much friction, but certainly without decision. Admiral Joy could only say the talks would continue so long as there was the slightest hope for agreement. But he does not fail to observe the armed communists playing soldier close by the medieval-like castle that is to serve as his billet. An imposing pile of stone inside of which somebody had forgot to put a latrine. But petty annoyances do not prevent the Admiral and his staff from relaxing after this first historic meeting. He is obviously aware that the Orientals will bargain with characteristic deliberation, whether they truly want peace or only time to regroup their scattered forces. Even at this first meeting with Admiral Joy, the Reds ignore General Ridgway's request that the talks be confined to military matters. But when Admiral Joy and his staff return to Munsan, the door to peace is not slammed shut. It is still ajar. Neither the delegates nor General Ridgway's staff have much to say to the anxiously waiting UN correspondents. But the reporters do learn that the Reds had full press representation at the meeting. The UN correspondents are quickly promised that they will be allowed to attend all future meetings. But even as the delegates return to Kaesong, accompanied by the press of the some 16 nations with troops in Korea, it seems that the Reds are preparing a strange welcome indeed. They did not intend to give up the power and propaganda of a single Red voice, crying its slanted news to the outside world. Already in the hands of Chinese communists was ample evidence by word and picture of how the Reds had distorted the news from Kaesong. For while the conference thus far had not even discussed the agenda originally agreed on because of the haggling of the Reds, Peking radio and newspapers were avidly reporting each meeting as a failure of the UN negotiators to meet honorable terms of the victors. This impression had to be corrected. General Ridgway bids goodbye to the correspondents. The general makes sure that all of them have availed themselves of the opportunity to report the true situation at Kaesong. But outside of Kaesong, they encounter a situation that shocks the free world. The reporters are met and stopped by armed Reds. This commissar of press relations is telling the correspondents of 16 United Nations that the world will hear of the armistice talks through the truthful communist press. Not in the history of modern ceasefire negotiations has there been such a crude breach of international law and ethics. The communists are anxious to have the rest of the vehicles continue without the newsmen, but UN officers refuse to break up the convoy. Further discussions fail to resolve the problem. The Red refusal to pass the complete convoy is relayed back to Munsan. The convoy is instructed to return if not passed by 0930. At the 0930 deadline, the vehicles turn around and head for Munsan. They promptly make their report to General Ridgway of the high-handed treatment they had received at Kaesong. The general's decision is immediate and decisive. Within a short period of time, the world was receiving General Ridgway's ultimatum from the lips of his aide, General Allen.
This is Brigadier General Frank A. Allen, Jr., United States Army, Chief of Information, United Nations Command, Advance Camp in Korea, broadcasting a message from General M.B. Ridgway, Commander-in-Chief, United Nations Command, to General Kim Il-young. Since the first meeting at Kaesong, your delegation has placed restrictions upon the movement of our delegation. It has subjected our personnel to the close proximity of your armed guards. It has delayed and blocked passage of our couriers. It has withheld its cooperation in establishment of two-way communications with our base, even though it agreed to do so immediately. It has refused admittance to the conference area of certain personnel in our convoy, which I desire, and for whose conduct I stated that I assumed full responsibility. The extension of the present recess and the delay in resuming the conference of our delegations is solely due to these unreasonable and unnecessary restrictions against which my representatives have repeatedly protested. The assurances which I require are simple and few. They include as primary prerequisites the establishment of an agreed conference area of suitable extent, completely free of armed personnel of either side. Each delegation must have complete reciprocity of treatment to include complete and equal freedom of movement to, from, and within the agreed conference area, and complete and equal freedom at all times in the selection of the personnel in its delegation party to include representatives of the press. I therefore now propose that a circular area with its center at approximately the center of Kaesong and with a 5-mile radius be agreed upon as a neutral zone. The eastern limit of the neutral zone shall be the present point of contact of our forces at Panmunjom. I propose that we both agree to refrain from hostile acts of any kind within this zone during the entire period of our conferences. I propose that we agree that the area of the conference site and the roads leading thereto, used by personnel of both delegation parties, be completely free of armed personnel. Should you continue to insist that restrictions are necessary for our personal safety or for any other reason, I propose that the conference site be moved to a locality which will afford the few simple assurances I have specified herein. Signed, M.B. Ridgway, General, United States Army, Commander-in-Chief, United Nations Command. That is all.
The communist bluff has been called. The general's terms are quickly accepted without argument. On 15 July, the armistice talks are resumed. The UN delegates return to Kaesong with a full complement of reporters, radio equipment, and cameras. From now on, no white flags will be carried to be misinterpreted by enemy press, and only the agreed-on minimum of red MPs are cited. Although the Reds attempt to belittle the controversy that stalled negotiations, the UN delegation is relieved of the tension created by the ominous presence of the Reds' submachine guns. The inscrutable communist delegates give no indication that they have been caught red-handed trying to pull a fast one. Admiral Joy is hopeful of progress now, since the Reds have made their first definite concession. But though the UN correspondents now have freedom of activity, they are hard put to keep busy during the days of 15 to 21 July. The conference produces little that is newsworthy. There is, however, one happy result. For the first day within 53 weeks of fighting, 24 hours pass in which not one U.S. soldier is killed. It seems evident now that at least the communist reporters and cameramen are ready and anxious to be friendly. Another conference ends with the Reds insisting that the military demarcation line must be at the 38th parallel, and they insist on discussing political matters that must be left to the UN Assembly. The communists have given the UN negotiators assurance of complete freedom of movement within a half-mile radius of the conference building and in the neutral corridor from Munsan. Telephone communications are set up from Kaesong to the Munsan peace camp. To ensure reliable radio communications, North Mountain near Seoul is selected as the site for the construction of a relay station. This station is part of the radio network connecting Munsan with 8th Army headquarters in Seoul and General Ridgway's offices in Tokyo. The altitude of the mountaintop reduces interference by surrounding hills and increases the effective range of the station. While the ceasefire talks are going on, UN commanders are keeping close contact with the enemy in the field and preventing him from gaining ground. However, it is apparent that the communists are staging a large-scale buildup of troops, particularly above Kaesong. There is formal acceptance at this time by General Nam Il of the principle that hostilities will continue until an armistice can be fully worked out. These armed Chinese being chased from the conference area are forerunners of more who will later march through Kaesong and cause still another ultimatum. During the week 15 to 21 July, the negotiators agree to list 3 points on the agenda for the ceasefire talks. 1, the physical details of stopping the fighting. 2, the definition of the ceasefire line. 3, safeguards against resumption of the fighting. The Reds also want to list another topic, to wit, the withdrawal of foreign troops from Korea. Admiral Joy refuses to accept this as part of the agenda. This firmness by the UN negotiators causes General Nam Il to request a 4-day recess, presumably for further instruction. The request is granted. The conference table is empty, except perhaps for the ever-present spirit of Jake Mully, past master of the stall and the double top.
From firmly established positions in a nearby valley, the mortar company supports the attack by lobbing their shells in on the hill just ahead of the infantrymen. In spite of the driving July rains and the tough uphill going, American riflemen renew their attack to secure Hill 1179 north of Yanggu. Previous attempts to take the hill have resulted in failure. Fiercely defended enemy positions force the troops to dig in preparatory to an all-out attack. The unpredictable Korean weather has proved to be as troublesome as the Reds themselves. The drive toward the hill is supported by self-propelled 155mm guns. With the aid of artillery spotters and information obtained from patrols, the big guns from this forward position concentrate their fire on known and suspected targets. Tanks coordinate their fire in the assault. Surface and air bursts clear the way for the riflemen. Strongly entrenched enemy positions are successfully eliminated from the path of the Allied advance. Creeping barrage, a heavy mortar company joins the assault on Hill 1179 in a continuous bombardment of 4.2 shells. From firmly established positions in a nearby valley, the mortar company supports the attack by lobbing their shells in on the hill just ahead of the infantrymen. C-119 flying boxcars drop ammunition and supplies as the UN unit reorganizes after the hill is taken. Airlift operations are necessary to reach the inaccessible hills of Korea, such as this, whenever supplies cannot be readily brought in by vehicles and other standard supply methods. As the peace talks continue and the United Nations line in the north becomes stable, a mob of exhausted, rag-clad refugees swarms back toward Seoul. They gather on the south shore of the Han River, hoping to cross and return to their homes, which they abandoned when the city was last left to the enemy. Not all have returned. Thousands have died from hunger and exhaustion along the road. Exposure to weather and disease have taken countless others. Most of the refugees must be turned back because of the serious food shortage in Seoul. For the present, only farmers and their families will be allowed to re-enter the city. Military authorities must check the papers of everyone seeking to return. Children, orphaned or separated from their parents in the confusion, shift for themselves. The screening process is a heartbreaking job. Most of these people have walked hundreds of miles to get back and have waited for days to have their papers examined. Those authorized to enter the city receive typhus injections. With the city's facilities destroyed, every precaution must be taken to prevent the spread of disease. As the screening goes on, the refugees who have been processed start for the river. Burdened with their families and the few possessions they have managed to cling to, they plod across the sand to the boats that will take them home. There have been many delays, but for those who have reached the boats, the long journey is almost over. The outlook is still grim and uncertain. The city is in ruins. They will find their homes nothing more than heaps of ashes and rubble. But at least it is hope and a possible end to the months of aimless wandering. The refugees allowed to return to Seoul are fortunate compared to those who must be left behind. For these unhappy people, like thousands of others wandering through Korea today, there is not even the small comfort of a home in the ruins. During a tank infantry patrol north of Yanggu, an enemy box mine puts this Allied tank out of action. A crew member is injured in the blast. Cautious probing reveals another box mine nearby, which is carefully deactivated and removed. The men gather materials to aid in bracing the tank as a tank retriever is ordered up from the rear. Mud and rain, the universal enemies of the soldier, slow down the work. The crippled M4 will be hauled back to maintenance shops in the rear, where skilled repair crews will quickly put it back into action. On 27 July at the Kaesong truce talks, the Reds agree to an agenda, leaving the question of withdrawal of foreign troops to political conferences. The most important question still to be settled is the military demarcation line. Tape recordings are made of the discussions. British and Australian communist correspondents Alan Winnington and Alfred Burchett cover the talks with the Red delegation. Red propaganda posters appear even in Kaesong. With the meeting at an end, General Na Mil and his Chinese colleagues leave to report to their superiors. The convoy of United Nations negotiators returning from Kaesong find themselves isolated when the pontoon bridge over the Imjin River is washed away during one of the many unpredictable floods in the area. An attempt to rescue an Army captain marooned on one of the pontoons is made by helicopter. Too weak to hold a line let down to him, the attempt is abandoned and a small boat puts out to rescue him. Personnel in the isolated convoy were airlifted by helicopter to Munsan in a 2-hour shuttle operation. As the peace party leaves Munsan for the August 5th meeting, the agenda question of a military demarcation line has yet to be settled. At Kaesong, Admiral Joy and General Craigie hope to meet the Reds on more amiable terms. They are in for a rude shock. In direct violation of the terms laid down for the truce talks, the communists have unaccountably permitted a unit of 83 Chinese soldiers in full battle dress to enter the neutral area. Fully armed with mortars, rifles, pistols, and submachine guns, they make their camp within full view of the conference headquarters. An Allied photographer is threatened away by the commander of the Red unit. The shortest session to date was terminated by Admiral Joy after 7 minutes, during which he accused the Reds of the violation. An empty conference room symbolizes the gulf between communism and democracy. Admiral Joy reports the neutrality violation to General Ridgway. The UN negotiators are called back to Tokyo. General Na Mil, with a sheepish smile, apologizes for the incident. After the meeting with General Ridgway in Tokyo, negotiations are resumed. A possible subject for discussion, a change of site for the truce talks.